Let's start today with a story about two very different men.
Oh, right. The janitor and the executive.
Yeah, exactly. So the first guy is Ronald Reed, and he basically spent 25 years fixing cars at a gas station, and then, another 17 years just sweeping floors as a janitor at a J.C. Penney.
Just a super quiet, incredibly modest life.
Right. But when he died at age 92, he literally made international headlines because this former janitor left behind an estate worth over $8 million.
Which is just mind-blowing.
Mm.
And that wasn't from a lottery ticket or, a secret inheritance.
No, not at all.
He literally just saved what little he could, put it in blue-chip stocks, and then he just waited decades.
Which brings us to the second man, Richard Fuscone.
Yeah.
And he was everything Ronald Reed was not.
The complete opposite.
Totally. I mean, Harvard educated, an executive at Merrill Lynch, highly successful in the traditional sense. He had this massive mansion, two pools, elevators, the works.
Yeah, all the visible markers of wealth.
Exactly. But then the 2008 financial crisis hit, and he was heavily in debt, totally illiquid, and he ended up declaring bankruptcy.
It's the ultimate paradox, isn't it? I
Okay.
mean, in what other field does someone with absolutely no formal education, no background, and no connections completely outperform a highly educated, highly resourced professional?
Right. You'd never see that in medicine.
Exactly. You would never see a person who has never studied medicine perform a better open-heart surgery than a Harvard-trained surgeon.
But it happens in finance all the time.
Ugh.
And welcome to this personalized deep dive where we are exploring a summary of the renowned concepts from the psychology of money.
It's such a fascinating topic.
It really is. And the story of the janitor and the executive, it perfectly illustrates the sort of mind-bending premise of our sources today, which is that financial success actually has very little to do with your raw intelligence or and almost everything to do with how you behave.
Yeah, we usually think of money as this hard science, right? Like physics or math. We picture a spreadsheet with crisp rows and formulas.
Right, the numbers just add up.
Exactly. We assume that if you understand the equation, you get the right result. But money operates in the messy, completely unpredictable real world of human psychology. It's driven by, fear, greed, pride, envy, and just our social environments.
So our mission today is to dive right into that psychology. We are going to focus heavily on the most critical, practical actions you can take to build wealth. Specifically, we'll look at the actual mechanics of consistent saving and how to actively defend yourself against the silent, wealth-killing trap of lifestyle inflation.
Those two habits alone change everything.
They really do. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with this idea that money isn't just a math problem. Because, if it were just math, the smartest people in the room would always be the richest.
Right, and they're not. The sources make a really compelling case that financial success is primarily a soft skill. It is all about emotional regulation.
Emotional regulation.
Yeah, consider what happens during a massive market correction. When you see your retirement account drop by 30% in a week, your IQ is completely irrelevant.
Oh, absolutely.
Your analytical skills just don't matter. If your amygdala triggers a panic response and forces you to sell everything at the absolute bottom, in that moment, emotional regulation totally takes the wheel.
I actually think about it like diet and exercise.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Because the biological math of losing weight is incredibly simple, right? It's just calories in versus calories out. You don't need a doctorate in nutrition to understand that basic equation.
Right, the math is obvious.
But the actual behavior of eating is entirely psychological. Like, say you had a terrible, stressful day at work. You were exhausted. You know you shouldn't eat a whole sleeve of cookies. The math says don't do it, but the stress totally overrides the logic, and you eat them anyway.
We've all been there.
Exactly. And money operates on that exact same emotional wavelength.
What's fascinating here is how that emotional wavelength ties into a concept the sources call "no one is crazy."
Right, the idea that every financial decision makes sense to the person making it.
Exactly. When we observe someone making a financial decision that looks totally irrational to us, like hoarding physical cash under a mattress, or conversely, risking their life savings on a highly volatile asset, our immediate instinct is to label them as foolish.
Yeah, we just sit behind our balance spreadsheets and judge their choices.
We do. But the reality is that every single person makes financial decisions based on an internal model of how the world works.
Yeah.
And that model is forged by their unique life experiences.
Right.
Think about a person who came of age during the Great Depression, someone who watched banks fail and their parents lose absolutely everything. they're going to have a fundamentally different neurological relationship with risk than someone who graduated college in the late 1990s during the booming dot-com era.
Oh, completely. The Great Depression survivor sees investing in the stock market as this terrifying gamble, while the 90s kid sees keeping money in a savings account as basically leaving free money on the table. Both of those perspectives make perfect logical sense based on the data their personal lives have collected.
Yeah, that internal logic is just incredibly powerful. And it's exactly why comparing your financial journey to someone else's is structurally flawed.
Because you don't have the whole picture.
Right. You are only seeing the external outcome. You aren't seeing their internal risk tolerance, their background, or the invisible forces at play, namely luck and risk.
Well, and those are practically twin forces, aren't they?
Pretty much, yeah.
They operate on the exact same premise, which is that the outcomes in our lives are guided by forces completely outside of our individual effort. And you could research a company for months, make a brilliantly calculated investment, and then a totally unforeseeable global event like a pandemic or a supply chain collapse just wipes out that company.
And that is risk materializing.
Exactly.
And the flip side is just as true. Someone could make a reckless, totally uneducated gamble, but they happen to execute it at the precise millisecond a market bubble expands. And that is luck.
Pure luck.
Yeah, but the danger is this fundamental attribution error we make as a society. When we succeed, we attribute it entirely to our own hard work and genius.
Oh, of course we do.
Right. But when we fail, we blame bad luck or unforeseen risks, and when we look at others, we often flip that narrative entirely.
Which explains so much about why incredibly smart people get caught up in speculative bubbles. I mean, it isn't because they suddenly forgot how to do math. It's because they see a neighbor or a coworker getting rich off some risky bet.
The FOMO kicks in.
Yeah, the fear of missing out, the envy, just the feeling that someone else got lucky while you were working so hard, that psychological pressure completely overrides the spreadsheet.
It does, which leads to kind of an uncomfortable realization if you think about it.
What's that?
Well, if our backgrounds warp our view of money, and if luck and risk are constantly shifting the ground beneath our feet, what is actually within our control?
Right.
The sources argue it really just boils down to one fundamental behavior, which is the habit of saving.
But wait, isn't earning a massive salary the easiest shortcut? Because, I mean, that runs counter to almost everything we hear in modern financial media.
It really does.
We are constantly told that the path to wealth is to hustle harder, secure a massive salary, create 5 different income streams, scale your revenue. Earning feels like you're playing offense, you know?
Yeah.
Like you're taking control. Saving just feels like playing defense.
I get why it feels that way. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, earning a high income without the behavioral habit of saving yields exactly zero wealth.
Zero.
Zero. Let's look at the mechanics of it. Making money and keeping money are 2 entirely separate skills.
Okay, right.
Imagine an executive earning $500,000 a year. If their internal psychology dictates that they absolutely must spend $505,000 to maintain their status and feel successful, their wealth is effectively negative.
They're just a pass-through.
Exactly. They are just a high-volume pass-through entity for cash. Now, compare them to a teacher making $60,000 who consistently saves 20% of their income.
The teacher is the one actually accumulating wealth.
Yes. The executive's high income is just an illusion of wealth.
Because saving is simply the gap between your ego and your income. I love that.
It's a great way to put it.
That is just such a clarifying way to frame it. You don't need a Wall Street salary to build wealth if you can control your ego. And that consistent saving, it leads to the ultimate mechanism of wealth creation, which is time.
Specifically, the compounding power of time.
Right.
And this is perhaps the single most critical mechanical concept in finance, yet it is notoriously difficult for the human brain to grasp.
Why is that?
Well, our brains evolved to understand linear growth. If you take 1 step, you move 1 meter. If you take 10 steps, you move 10 meters.
Well, simple math.
Right. We do not intuitively understand exponential growth, where the growth itself starts generating more growth.
So how does that actually work in practice? Because people hear the word compounding all the time, but the mechanism often feels abstract to a lot of people.
Think of it like rolling a snowball down a long, snow-covered hill.
Okay.
When you start, the snowball is pretty small. As it rolls, it picks up a thin layer of snow. But as the snowball gets larger, its surface area expands. With every revolution, it's picking up significantly more snow than it did on the previous revolution.
So it's growing faster the bigger it gets.
Exactly. In finance, your initial savings are an interest. Then that interest earns its own interest. Decades later, the vast majority of your wealth isn't the money you saved, it's the interest that your interest generated.
That's the Warren Buffett phenomenon, right? I mean, people study his investing strategies endlessly trying to find his secret formula.
Yes, they're always looking for complex stock-picking strategies. But the actual mechanical secret to Warren Buffett's wealth is that he started investing when he was 10 years old. 10. And he kept doing it into his 90s. More than 90% of his net worth was accumulated after his 65th birthday.
That is wild.
The hill he rolled his snowball down was simply longer than anyone else's. Time is the ultimate equalizer. You don't need to be an investing genius, you just need to start early and refuse to interrupt the compounding process.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If the math of compounding is that undeniable, and it's basically just about rolling a snowball down a hill, why do so many people derail the process the exact moment they finally get a decent salary? Like, as soon as people find a little bit of success, they suddenly stop building wealth.
Because of that silent trap you mentioned earlier, the intro lifestyle inflation.
Ah, right.
It's the greatest threat to that compounding snowball. And understanding why it happens requires looking at the tension between getting wealthy and staying wealthy.
Those sound like they should be the exact same thing, but they require totally contradictory mindsets, don't they?
Completely contradictory. Getting wealthy requires optimism. It requires, putting yourself out there, taking calculated risks, and believing in a brighter future.
Right.
But staying wealthy requires the opposite. It requires a healthy dose of paranoia. It requires frugality. It requires the psychological discipline to look at a significant pay raise and actively choose not to change your daily life.
Which is so hard, because the moment your income goes up, your psychological baseline for what feels normal immediately shifts.
Oh, instantly.
You get the promotion, suddenly driving a 10-year-old Honda just doesn't feel right for a manager, so you lease a luxury sedan. Then your perfectly fine apartment feels a bit small, so you move to a luxury condo with higher rent.
And what happens?
You haven't actually increased your wealth at all, you've only increased your overhead. You are basically running twice as fast on the treadmill just to stay in the exact same place.
And the mechanism driving that treadmill is deeply rooted in our evolutionary psychology.
Really? How so?
Well, for thousands of years, humans survived in small tribes where status mattered. If you had high status, you had better access to resources and a much higher chance of survival. We are biologically hardwired to signal our success to the tribe.
Wow. Okay.
Today, that instinct translates directly into lifestyle inflation. We buy the luxury car or the designer clothes, not because they are inherently better, but because they are visible signals of our rank.
We are inflating our lifestyles just to seek external validation.
Precisely. This is why the sources emphasize that keeping money requires profound humility.
Humility.
Yeah, humility acts as the anchor against that biological urge to signal status. When you lack humility, your spending is dictated by the perceived expectations of others. You end up buying things you don't even really want, with money you just earned, just to impress people whose opinions shouldn't dictate your financial security.
You are literally outsourcing your financial stability to the opinions of strangers. That is a terrifying thought when you realize just how pervasive it is.
It's everywhere.
I mean, we are constantly bombarded by the highlight reels of everyone else's seemingly wealthy lives on social media. It creates this incredible pressure to keep up.
Absolutely.
Which really forces a step back to ask a fundamental question. If we are supposed to save consistently, let our money compound, and fiercely defend against lifestyle inflation by not buying the fancy car or the big house, what is all this saved money actually for?
That question right there requires a complete paradigm shift in how we view the utility of money. Most people operate on the assumption that the purpose of having money is to exchange it for goods.
To buy stuff.
To acquire things, exactly. But the framework presented in the sources redefines the ultimate goal. The highest dividend money pays is not material goods.
Yeah.
It is freedom.
Freedom. Just the autonomy to wake up every single morning and say, I can do whatever I want today on my own timeline.
Yes. Autonomy is the true measure of wealth. True wealth is having the financial buffer to leave a toxic job without facing ruin. It is the ability to take a 6-month medical leave to care for a family member without panicking about foreclosure. It's the power to live life strictly on your own terms, without being forced to answer to a boss, a creditor, or a desperately tight monthly budget.
So what does this all mean for how we navigate the world? It means we have to completely retrain our eyes to recognize what wealth actually looks like. The sources use this brilliant counterintuitive phrase, true wealth is invisible.
I love that phrase.
Right, because our whole lives we are taught to judge wealth by what we can clearly see. The Rolex, the Lamborghini, the massive mansion. We look at those visual markers and say, oh, that person is wealthy.
But those visible markers don't represent wealth. They represent money that has already been spent.
Wow, yeah.
When you see someone driving a $300,000 sports car, the only objective financial data you have about them is that they have $300,000 less than they did before they bought the car.
That's hilarious, but so true.
Or, which is statistically way more likely, they are carrying a massive amount of high-interest debt.
So it's the illusion of wealth.
Mm.
It is fake wealth designed to satisfy that evolutionary urge to signal status.
Exactly.
Real wealth is the money you don't spend. Real wealth is the unbought car. It's the unpurchased diamond. It is the stacked savings account and the retirement portfolio that are quietly compounding in the background. Real wealth is completely invisible to the naked eye. You cannot physically see someone's lack of debt.
No, you can't.
You cannot see the profound peace of mind they experience when their head hits the pillow at night.
This raises an important question we all have to ask ourselves whenever we face a significant financial decision. Every time you are tempted to inflate your lifestyle, challenge yourself by asking, is this purchase buying me stuff, or is this purchase buying me time?
Buying stuff or buying time?
Because every dollar spent on a visible status symbol is a dollar mathematically stolen from your future autonomy.
Framing it as stealing from your future autonomy. I mean, that completely changes the psychological weight of the decision. Suddenly, choosing not to upgrade your car doesn't feel like a sacrifice or a deprivation. It feels incredibly empowering.
It's a choice you make for yourself.
Exactly. You aren't denying yourself a luxury. You are actively purchasing your own independence. You are securing the ability to not be chained to a desk or an alarm clock 10 years down the road.
And achieving that invisible wealth requires a long-term time horizon. The investors who successfully build generational freedom, they understand that short-term volatility is just the price of admission.
Right.
When the stock market dips or the economy gets rocky, the natural human emotion, again, driven by our survival instincts, is panic. The instinct is to sell everything and run for the hills.
But if you panic and sell, you interrupt the snowball. You stop the compounding process dead in its tracks.
Long-term thinkers succeed because their eyes are locked on the invisible goal of freedom decades from now. They don't react emotionally to the daily news cycle because they know that market crashes are inevitable, temporary tolls on the road to wealth.
Just bumps in the road.
Right. They don't let temporary fear override the long-term math.
So to bring this all together, money is deeply, intrinsically connected to our psychology, our emotional regulation, and our deeply ingrained habits.
Yes.
The mechanics of wealth are remarkably simple, right? Spend less than you earn and invest the difference. But the execution is extraordinarily difficult because human beings are complex and so easily swayed by ego and environment.
Which is exactly why mastering your behavior is the singular path to lasting success.
And that mastery rests on those two highly practical daily habits we've unpacked today. First, saving consistently, creating that critical gap between your ego and your income and giving your money the time it needs to compound.
And second, vigorously defending against lifestyle inflation, cultivating the humility to keep your expenses stable even as your income climbs so that you are actually staying wealthy rather than just appearing wealthy to strangers.
Because the end goal isn't a garage full of luxury cars. The ultimate goal is waking up with absolute control over your own time. True wealth is quiet, it's invisible, and it is the most liberating force in the world.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound paradox to consider about the nature of investing itself.
Yes, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've established that money isn't just about what you know, it's about how you behave. We've explored how true wealth is invisible and how successful people achieve it by ignoring the biological urge to show off and avoiding emotional knee-jerk reactions to market chaos.
The world is incredibly loud. The markets are chaotic. There is always a new crisis dominating the headlines, a new trending asset class, a new reason to panic, or a new speculative bubble that everyone around you seems to be chasing.
Right. And if that is the relentless environment we have to navigate, then perhaps the ultimate financial superpower isn't found in possessing a complex algorithmic spreadsheet.
Yeah.
It isn't found in having a brilliant active trading strategy or the ability to constantly predict the next big market move. Perhaps the greatest, most lucrative financial skill you can possibly develop in a panicked, fast-moving world is simply the psychological endurance to sit quietly on the couch and do absolutely nothing.